Good morning, big data world. This is introduction to Apache Spark for the business analyst. So let's start with the second part of that sentence. What do I mean by business analyst? I mean a person who doesn't code, usually wears a jacket and tie. You might hear them say things like leverage, core competency. They'll nod their head vigorously during staff meetings. Those kinds of people. I consider myself more of those people, fortunately. Apache Spark, what do we mean by this? This is what you've probably heard as a general processing engine for big data. It's the new hot thing. It's the reason why big data is going to become even more ubiquitous than it was in 2008 with Hadoop. Those definitions or descriptions are so abstract that they're essentially worthless, and that really pisses me off. So if you're somebody who doesn't code but wants to analyze data, which I believe you should, then Apache Spark is going to help you manipulate big data fast and relatively easily. We're going to explain how each of those three things work in this presentation. We're going to focus on the why. So we'll get in later on the how. There are tons of tutorials on how to start coding, but this is really why you should be doing this. Why you should spend the time. You should put down Gossip Girl or the Kardashians or whatever other shit you're into, and focus a little bit on learning some coding, because now is the time. If you want to manipulate lots of data relatively easily and with pretty good speed, Apache Spark is what's going to enable you to do that. So let's dive right in. A little bit about me. I'm not coming at this as a computer scientist, right? So I'm an English major. If I can learn it, you can learn it. I know that always rings a little hollow to me when I hear it, but God damn it, you need to believe me. So I use data at work, and I want to use more of it. That led me to doing a little bit of coding. So I went from Excel to a little bit of SQL to Python. You don't have to know what those things are. It doesn't matter right now. But eventually I realized I wanted to work with more data than I had on my single computer. Does that make it big data? I don't know. But you know what? It was big enough for me because I couldn't store it and process it on my local machine. Hence, I started looking for saying, how do I store and process data if I have more that I can use on my laptop? Enter the world of big data. And go figure, the world of big data isn't quite popular. So it was well timed. But more importantly, so why am I giving this presentation? The reason is there's just so much absolute garbage out there right now about big data, Hadoop, Spark. You just hear these terms thrown around. You hear these descriptions where people, you ask them, hey, what is Spark? And they're like, well, Spark powers self-driving cars. And it's like, well, what the hell are you talking about? Like, code powers self-driving cars? Like, oh, I don't know if it's code. I just know it's this framework, this ecosystem. It's like, this is all garbage. And I think it would be fine if it helped get the conversation going, which in a way it does. But right now, it's taken on this snobbery level where you hear these either salespeople or executives talk about the cloud and big data, and if you're not on the same page as them, then clearly you're an idiot. You're not in the know. And then you ask them what it actually is, and you get all these asinine responses. Like, let's take self-driving cars for example, because you can tell they'll find out about this. I have no idea what powers a self-driving car, but I do know one component is a fucking car. And there's a shit ton of other software in that car that enables it to make decisions. Spark may be part of the engine that's going to help it churn through lots of data as it decides whether, oh, do I hit this grandmother or do I hit this group of small children? Which one do I kill, right? Let's be morbid about it. But it's going to have to make that decision. But it may be part of that, but it's not the breakthrough technology. It's certainly one of many. And so it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like saying, well, yeah, Spark powers a self-driving car, just like the fact that we're on this rock that's 92 million miles from the sun powers a self-driving car. We have photosynthesis, so we can get oxygen to breathe. Like, all of these things are factors, but to the extent that it's the driving factor, I think driving factor in a self-driving car is very loose. So this upsets me, and again, it's strictly mostly because when people hear about this who want to get involved, you're saying, well, I'm not a developer, but how can I start manipulating big data? It's like, oh, well, you ready to power a self-driving car? It's like, well, fuck no, I'm not. So then what do I do now? Like, okay, let me go back to Excel and go back to my PowerPoint slides, and let me go back to talking about how, I'm going to start a new corporate retreat, but it'll be a corporate attack, right? Because we're never on the retreat. I don't know. It's terrible. Worse, or maybe worse is an unfair transition, but related to this is the fact that it's very difficult to explain the concept of Hadoop, Spark. The two technologies that we're going to throw under the umbrella of big data quickly. Maybe a better presenter could, but I don't think it can be. And unfortunately, there's this very nice video from IBM on Spark, And it's only 1:17 long, and I'll let you watch it on your own time. But essentially, they never tell you what it is, and they don't give you any context. So you don't understand why this technology exists because you don't understand what preceded it and what preceded that. And of course, without any of that context, none of it's going to make any sense. And worse, when you actually dive into it, if you have the stick-to-itiveness to do so, you're going to be like, wow, this coding thing is hard. And the way you code in Spark is different than the way you'd code just to process data locally, like on a single machine. So why would I even bother with all this? Like, well, if you weren't doing it the way it was done before, then you realize how much of a pain in the ass it was to write MapReduce jobs. That's the old way it was done in Hadoop. And then if you weren't writing or stringing computers together to create your own distributed system, you didn't realize how much of a breeze MapReduce was compared to that. So all this context is necessary. Okay, so my goal for tonight, or wherever the heck, whenever you're listening to this, is, put down Twitter, whatever you're doing. Maybe not this presentation, but stop this, start learning Spark. Right? This is, if you want to waste an hour or two a day, this is a good way to do it. You're gonna immediately improve your job prospects, and I would posit I think you're gonna have a little bit of fun. Okay, so I think in order to do that, it means you to put down your other distracting items. You need to know three things about Spark. So Spark allows you to gather big data fast, gather big data in lots of different formats, and gather big data easier than before. Now, note, I am not saying it's always going to be super fast. You're going to be able to get data in any format that you want, or that it'll be easy. But in general, on the whole, those three things will be true. And like I said before, we'll spend enough time talking about how it used to work, how big data processing used to be, so that you know why easier is actually better. More importantly, why now is the time for you to jump in, because it would be a fair counter argument to say, hey, I get that it's easier than it was before. Maybe the Model T Ford was obviously a huge innovation over a horse, but I don't really want to hand crank an engine because I'm afraid I'll break my arm or something. You may say now's not the time to jump in for me. Okay, fine, but this would be the time. Now I'm going to explain to you why now is the time. And the ease of use is easy enough for you to just take the plunge. All right, so I've made the mistake of not telling you what Spark is. We've been at this for a few minutes. So what the heck is Spark? Spark is many things, but on one level, at its most basic level, Spark is code. So if anybody talks about Hadoop or Spark or big data, and they're not talking about the software as code, they're not really giving you the full picture. So here are just 2 lines of Spark code. So code, by the way, is just text that we save in text files. We use different extensions. So if I have a text file, I might have the extension .txt. If I have an Excel file, my extension might be .xlsx. With a Spark code, I can write Spark in multiple languages, programming languages. So for example, in our talk, we're going to go through some Python examples predominantly. But we would save, in this case, this is a Scala example. I'm merely tossing these terms out here not to hit you with a barrage, but just to kind of separate. There are programming languages, there's this engine that is Spark, and then all of these all the code is just words that we save in text files. And if it's Scala code, we'll save it in a text file, we'll change the extension to .scala. So we're going to run it with Spark, but we're going to have this file that says .scala. That's what it is. This is Spark in all its glory, guys. There's no application behind it, or there's no GUI. There's nothing that you can look at that's shiny. It's just code. And so what does this code do? Let's look at it really quickly. What this code does, the first line, is we're going to read in a text file. And that text file, as you can see, file is test.csv. So it's a comma-separated value file, something you might open up in Excel, something that would work well in a spreadsheet program. The next step, we set this file we just read into a variable called input. Now we're going to go through this input. We're going to do something called collect, which you don't need to worry about right now. We'll get into it later. And then for each line in this input file, we're going to, or for each item in this input file, we're going to print the line out. So all we're doing here is we're reading in a file, and we're printing it out to our console. By the way, we're going to run this from the command line, but we'll get there too. Why start with this, right? The reason is when I open a file in Excel, I'm a business analyst, I don't code, then I'm going to open up my Excel file and look at it. Starting with code, we're going to open up our file and look at it. Not too complicated, 2 lines, no big deal. We'll keep rolling with this in a little bit.